Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander Deck Tech. In today's episode, we're looking at Big Daddy Vampire himself, Edgar Markov. It is 3 red, white and a black for a 4/4 legendary creature Vampire Knight with First Strike and Haste. It has the very fair eminence ability of, whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. It also has, whenever Edgar Markov attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control. Edgar Markov is one of the strongest commanders ever printed. That eminence ability working in the command zone means it never has to actually be cast for it to affect the game. It can just sit there and make us a token board state whenever we cast a vampire. But the fact that when we do cast it, and then attack with it straight away, as it has haste, it'll double the power of all the tokens that it's made, as well as buff up the rest of our board as well. So not only is it an engine, it's also a win con. It is already one of the most popular commanders ever to exist, and the only thing stopping it going higher is purely availability. Price should not stop you building it, however. You can always proxy Edgar until the inevitable reprint drops it down to a much more reasonable cost. So with the preamble out of the way, how are we going to be building the deck? Well, this is going to be a Vampire Matters deck with a token go wide sub-theme. The reason for this is our commander rewards us when we play vampires by making us vampire tokens. So with that, we want to play as many vampires as possible so we can make the biggest board state before turning everything sideways and buffing up our creatures with Edgar and some other effects. A quick note on how this video will work. We'll be giving you all the sections that make up the deck and a bunch of cards for you to choose from to truly make the deck your own. Any card we mentioned will be down in the description below. While you're there, please consider giving the video a like if you found it helpful. Our first section is our Vampires Matter section. This will be the biggest part of the deck, as we want as many cards to trigger and work with Edgar as possible. First up, we have some Lord effects on vampires. These are just cards that come into play, make a vampire token with Edgar, and then make all of our other vampires bigger. Having one in play will be very good, having multiple in play will be fantastic. Next we have laws that require a bit of extra work. Cordial Vampire needs other creatures to die, Vampire Socialite needs an opponent to lose some life, Drana, Liberator of Malakir needs to deal combat damage to a player, Rakish Heir needs the vampires to deal combat damage to a player, and then Bloodline Keeper needs to flip into Lord of Lineage. But if we're all being honest, none of those are actually too hard, and just having more lords in our deck, all pumping up our ever-growing board state, will just be phenomenal. A super wide board of 3/3s or 4/4s is very, very scary. We next have some buff effects on Planeswalkers, specifically Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, and Sorin, Solemn Visitor. Importantly, they both buff up our team while also making vampire tokens. Both fantastic in the deck, especially as we'll have plenty of blockers to protect them as well. Talking of vampire tokens, we also have Mavren, Fein, Dusk, Apostle. It all just adds the number of vampires that we have, and more is always the merrier. We then have Forerunner of the Legion, a fantastic tutor that is able to get any vampire out of the deck and put it into our hand. Then we have a bunch of cheap vampires. Because our commander doesn't need to be in play for us to get the token making ability, we can just play these really early in the game to just start the token train rolling from turn 1. The fact in this deck they all just have make a 1/1 vampire token tacked onto them is truly busted. Then lastly, in any creature type matters deck, you can't look past Herald's Horn. It makes our vampires a generic list to cast, and then can let us draw an extra card at the start of each turn. Talking of card draw, we need 8 to 10 dedicated bits to help keep the deck ticking over. First up, we have some card draw effects on vampires. Dust Legion Duelist draws us a card whenever Edgar puts a counter on it. Dust Legion Zealot replaces itself when it comes into play. Welcoming Vampire is basically guaranteed to draw us an extra card every turn. You then have Twilight Prophet, which will easily draw us a card while draining out our opponents, and then Champion of Dusk will draw us a bucket load of cards to refill our hand later in the game. We then also have a card like Vanquisher's Banner. Again, it'll buff up our vampires, but it'll also draw us a card whenever we cast one as well. Then to synergize with all the tokens that we'll be making, we have Skullclamp. Absolutely busted in any deck that makes a bunch of 1/1s, and then you have Idol of Oblivion, which in this deck is just a better Phyrexian Arena. Then lastly, you have some one-time bits of card draw that require us to sack a creature to get their effect. Corrupted Conviction, Village Rites, Deadly Dispute, and Plumb the Forbidden are all fantastic at turning our 1/1s into some card advantage. Moving on now to our ramp section, and like with most decks we need at least 8 bits here to give the deck the fuel it needs. As we're in Mardu, it will be pretty standard fare here. You want to run things like your Soul Ring, your Arcane Signets, and then a selection of Signets and Talismans. I'm always a fan of Chromatic Lantern as the solo expensive mana rock in any 3-colour deck, just because it lets you be lazy with working out what lands you need to tap. Next up is our interaction section, and like our other sections, you want to start with 8 bits, and then we're going to go up from there the more competitive that our playgroup is. For some synergistic options, we first have Olivia's Wrath and Kindred Dominance. These are basically one-sided board wipes that'll take out everyone else's creatures and leave ours alone. You then have a more expensive Ravenous Chupacabra with Patron of the Vein, but with the added upside of it buffing our whole team as well. Then we have the best bits of creature removal going, with Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. Just absolutely perfect. If you have them, run them for when you need something really gone. You then have a bunch of options in these colours that remove a permanent, not just a creature. They're all very good at giving us a variety in our answers. You then also have some of the best board wipes available in all of Magic in these colours, so here you can really just run the ones that suit your budget best. Next up is a little bit of protection. When Edgar does finally hit the board, it will paint a bit of a target onto itself. To help keep Edgar and our vampire horde around, we first have cards like And They Shall Know No Fear and Teferi's Protection. These both just protect our board whenever we need them to, absolutely perfect for blanking a board wipe. You then have the classics in Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, which are just great at protecting Edgar or a key creature when we need them to. And then lastly, we have Dust Legion Sergeant. This is a really nice card that can protect our non-token creatures by giving them Persist. That's great to protect some key creatures, or it lets us buff up our drain effects by letting us sacrifice our creatures twice in one turn. Next up is some Recursion. We don't need too many here, but I always like running a couple of bits to get back some key cards. In this deck specifically, I really like Whip of Erebos, as the added lifelink will be really good at keeping us alive, and then Patriarch's Bidding is a must in any creature type heavy deck. As importantly, it can bring back a whole board state of vampires in just one go. Okay, we have the base of the deck, let's go over some dedicated ways of winning the game. First up is Sanctum Seeker. Dear God, what a card this is in this deck. With a horde of vampires, the Sanctum Seeker makes each opponent lose a life whenever we attack one of our opponents. That is so busted, we don't even have to attack a player to take them out of the game with this card. To keep that life loss train going, you also have Bloodletter of Alkazots. This is effectively a damage doubler in this deck, that'll also work really nicely with some of our other win cons that we'll get onto in a minute. We then have Roaming Throne, another super busted card in this deck, and while it doesn't work with Edgar unless it's in play, it will still work with every other vampire that has a triggered ability. Think of all the ones that we've gone over so far. Doubling up all of them is going to be unbelievably nuts. And then when Edgar does come into play, it'll double up any tokens after that, and also double up the counters as well. Talking of doubling, we then have some more ways of doubling up those tokens with cards like Anointed Procession and Mondrak Glory Dominus. Having double the amount of creatures will kill your opponents doubly quickly. And then we have Cathar's Crusade. With all the small little creatures and tokens coming into play, this will put so many counters onto our whole board, it could win the game without too much help. For some more game-ending spells, we have the White Overrun in Akroma's Will, great at both offense and defense, and then you have cards like Shed Animosity and the always funny Coat of Arms to make our vampire board state all the more deadly. Then, lastly, we have a nice little aristocrat package of cards. A lot of these are vampires anyway, and in a deck making a lot of tokens, it means we can easily sacrifice some creatures to drain out the table. I've only put the vampire cards that will go into this on the list, but there's a ton more options out there that you can look into if you really wanted to push this a little bit more. Okay, rounding off the deck with some utility lands, we have a couple of decent options that we can go over. First up, we have Vault of the Archangel, a great way of making our vampires that little bit more deadly. And then in any token deck, I absolutely love running Westvale Abbey, because big, indestructible flyers tend to be pretty good. You then have Voldaren Estate, a nice mana fixer that can give us little card filtering later in the game with some blood tokens. For some lands that make black mana, we have Bojuka Bog to nerf a graveyard player out of the game, we have Phyrexian Tower as a bonus sack outlet, and then we have Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth to just fix our deck for black, which will be the primary colour of the deck. For some white lands, you have some bonus removal with Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, and then you have some bonus card draw with Minas Tirith. Right, thank you all very much for watching. Do make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and do let me know down in the comments if there's any other commanders that you have out there that you would like me to take a look at. But until next time, I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.